Alrighty, hello everybody. How are we doing today? That extra little bit of zipping on my sweater made zero difference. Hi. It's time for another behind the screens for our Ravensdale Roleplays Ravnica game. The first official gameplay session of which, by the way, is this Sunday, the 27th of February, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific time. So last time we got together with the whole gang, we rolled up some characters and everything like that. We took the opportunity in the meantime to finish those characters up. And so we'll be introducing the characters really quickly at 1 o'clock on Sunday, and then we'll be jumping right into the first session. So lots of stuff coming up. As a result, I kind of need to make sure that I've got things as squared away as I can possibly get them. So I did a few things between last session and this session because I didn't want to do a bunch of the number crunching and the math and everything like that on screen. I can if people are interested in that kind of thing. If anybody's having trouble with like calculating encounter difficulties or gauging what kind of the reality is of challenge ratings, because Wizards of the Coast knows what they're doing. 5e is very tightly put together, but sometimes it can be difficult to tell, is my party capable of handling this particular threat? On paper, yes, but are they really? So, I'm always happy to chat about stuff like that. That's kind of the whole purpose of this little endeavor here. So, if you have questions, throw them at me. But before we get into the actual encounters themselves, one of the things that I really like is actually pardon me, happens every time. One of the things I really like was an alternate encounter building method that was first introduced in Unearthed Arcana, which is basically Wizards of the Coast releasing semi-official playtest rules and stuff like that, things they're considering putting into upcoming source books, and they basically, bless you, my love. It's okay. And basically, it's an opportunity to go in and try out these rules before they get printed. And you can give feedback, and they'll consider the feedback from all the different people who playtest it. Basically, they're crowdsourcing playtesters. And yeah, I'm a fan of this stuff. It's kind of like free. It's kind of like free supplemental material from Wizards. So it's usually relatively balanced. Not always, but usually. Anyways, so Unearthed Arcana, the encounter building document, I forget when this came out, but it was a little while ago. And it has something that I actually prefer to use over just the straight experience calculation that you're supposed to do. And that is this little kind of ratio chart that they use. And so it's basically saying for first level characters, a CR 1/8 creature, one first level character should be a match for two of those creatures with no real significant, concern. They might take a little bit of damage, they might use a resource or two, but generally speaking, they should walk away from that fight not unscathed, but not near death. Whereas if you have one first level character, they're the equivalent of one CR 1/4 monster. And then if you have a CR 1/2 monster, you need 3 first level characters to be the equivalent of that, and so on and so forth. The reason I like this is because I like to mix up my monster groups. So if the players are fighting zombies, I don't want them to just fight zombies. I would like there to be a mix of, maybe a couple zombies, a couple skeletons who can fire bows at range, and then also toss in like a large size zombie or something crazy. And not all those things have the same, or those things don't have all the same challenge rating. So getting into like the XP calculations and whatnot, you can find yourself like, oh, just just a little bit over the threshold for what would be considered a difficult encounter, but taking a monster away doesn't feel as dynamic and everything like that. So I don't know. I think ultimately it ends up being approximately the same as using the XP calculations. I just like this way better because it suits the way I like to build encounters out. So Oh wow, this came out all the way back in 2016. So this is an old, Unearthed Arcana by this point. They probably have released this in a source book and I just missed it. But yeah. So this is kind of what I use to calculate my encounters out. And having said that, what I did, because I don't know exactly where the players are going to go, that's kind of one of the tricky things about running an urban adventure versus a dungeon adventure, or even a wilderness adventure to a certain extent, is, if your players are in the middle of a dungeon, they've only got set ways that they can go, unless they're really high level and they have like pass wall and teleportation and crazy things like that. So for most normal, like lower level characters, if you're in a dungeon, you've got whichever directions the tunnels lead you in. Similarly, if you're in a wilderness, like a big forest, I mean, you're going to be dealing with forest-related stuff. You're going to be trying to get to your next destination or hunting down whatever monster it is you're trying to find. When you're in a city environment, there's so many other options available that it can be a little bit daunting from a DM perspective to figure out how to prepare for that. And my rule of thumb for situations like this is to do relatively minimal preparation, actually, which I know is counterintuitive. So, because in these environments there are just so many options, players could decide to go talk to the Thieves Guild. They might go decide to see if they can convince the local constabulary to help them out. They may go and, appeal to the king. They might go to the Mages Guild. I mean, any one of those things are potentially viable options. And you don't necessarily want to tell someone, well, I didn't plan for you to go to the Mages Guild, so you can't go to the Mages Guild. That's not really good DMing. So, instead, it's better to do a little bit of preparation in all of those directions, just so you kind of have something that you can fall back on, sort of as a stalling tactic. So if the players say they're going to go talk to the king, then you don't necessarily have to write up an entire map of the castle and figure out all the different members of the king's staff and whatnot. Just say, hey, they go to talk to the king, they get introduced to the king's jester. Maybe the jester is the guy who accepts all the visitors initially, and they kind of have to have a social encounter with the jester to get past him and go talk to the king. So you can kind of write up some of those initial encounters that will give you the opportunity to kind of figure out how you want the rest of that, not story arc, but like that side arc to go. I might not have explained that sufficiently, so let me know, but that's kind of the way I approach these things. So what I did is, because there are so many different factions or guilds in the Ravnica setting, I basically came up with an encounter list for all the different factions. So we're using Krenko's gang, and this is an NPC who's not affiliated with any of the Ravnica guilds in the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica book. He's it's like a side adventure or starting adventure that they put in there just to kind of get people introduced to the setting. And I took that and I'm bastardizing it. I'm chopping a lot of it out and just taking the pieces that I like. So this goblin gang leader named Krenko is out and about, and he's going to factor into the story to an extent. Again, depending on which direction the characters go, he'll factor in more or less. But in this case, I went ahead and just kind of did a quick explanation or description of the kind of encounter areas that I plan on using for this. Yeah, sure, good idea. It sounds like you don't want to get too detailed, though, because players will most likely go in some direction you hadn't expected, like the Spanish Inquisition. Yeah, player characters are very much like the Spanish Inquisition. Nobody expects what they're going to do next. And so that is definitely something that we have to keep in mind, we have to account for. And again, we account for that by kind of winging it a little bit. So for this particular gang, if the players run into these guys, they can run into them in a couple of different kind of settings, I guess you could say. So we've got an easy encounter, which is 2 thugs. Thugs are challenge rating 1/2. If we go back to the encounter list here, our characters are level 2. So 1 player character is equal to 1 CR 1/2 monster. So 2 thugs, they're both CR 1/2. 2 thugs is the equivalent of 2 PCs. We've got 3 PCs, so if they run into that fight, it should be relatively easy. They may spend some resources, but it shouldn't be too hard. Then it gets a little bit tougher. You go into having 3 bandits and 2 thugs. And 3 bandits. Bandits are all challenge rating 1/8. So challenge rating 1/8. 1 level 2 player character is equal to 3 CR 1/8 monsters. So you've got the 3 bandits and the 2 thugs from before. So now this is about on par for 3 second level characters. And then you get into the difficult encounter. So you've got 2 bandits, 1 thug, and 3 goblins. So goblins are all CR 1/4, bandits are CR again 1/8, and thugs are CR 1/2. So you've got 1 thug, the equivalent of 1 player character. You've got 3 goblins, the equivalent of another player character. And then you've got 2 bandits, which are the equivalent of another player character. So on the surface, these 2 encounters are going to be the same, kind of the same ratio. But because we've expanded this out and added an extra source of damage and an extra target, that increases the difficulty of the encounter because you've got 1 more person who's rolling an attack roll or doing other things. Panic roll. Yes, I do have a bias. I love goblins. Goblins are awesome. But in this particular case, that actually wasn't my bias coming into play. This is just part of the setting already, and I was just co-opting that. It's not the focus. It's not going to be a goblin-centric game, although, no, not going to happen. Not this time around. And actually, Kashra, I think you'll find if you watch the last Behind the Screens episode, I did say there was going to be math involved, because that's just the kind of game Dungeons & Dragons is. So, luckily, you don't have to be great at math in order, not saying that you're not, but you don't have to be great at math in order to DM Dungeons & Dragons. You just, after a while, you kind of get a feel for it. So the first, few encounters that you build, you might struggle a little bit, but at a certain point, you kind of just get to the point, you get to be able to just eyeball it, sort of. So yeah, in this particular case, the difficult encounter is going to be not significantly difficult compared to the medium encounter, but it's going to be a little bit tougher. So in this particular case, the difficult encounter should make the characters legitimately concerned about the outcome of the fight. Not that it should kill them, but they should definitely have that sense of, holy crap, we may have bitten off more than we can chew. Medium encounter should be like, oh, okay, that was a good challenge. We kind of got our workout in. We're all sweating a little bit, but ultimately the heroes kind of should know going into it that they're going to walk away without any major problems. Boo, maths. Hey, maths are awesome. Maths brought us all kinds of cool stuff. Like Dungeons and Dragons. See? Alright. So that's for Krenko's gang. In the encounter area, I really want to focus on kind of tight, winding city slums, alleyways, pathways, things like that. So I'm thinking like small buildings, like small shops or small hovels with a front door and maybe a back door that characters can slip through, a window that someone could jump through if they wanted to. Lots of bystanders, civilians and stuff like that, that, people could grab and use as human shields, or they could threaten to hurt them in order to kind of get a chance to get away. Debris and detritus cluttering the street to act as difficult terrain, and give characters a reason to have to make jump checks in order to not lose whoever they're trying to chase after. One of the things I love about goblins in 5th edition is they get this ability to disengage or hide, I want to say, as a bonus action on their turn, and it's a racial thing. So the goblins, if they run into this particular encounter, if they run into the difficult version, the goblins actually are going to shine here because they can make an attack, and then they can use their bonus action to disengage and then move away without taking opportunity attacks. So that's one of the reasons that the difficult encounter is going to be so much tougher, is because they're going to have that kind of guerrilla tactics hit and run that the goblins are going to be able to do, and it's going to be harder to pin them down and take them out. So I'm kind of looking, if they go that route, I'm looking forward to running that encounter. I think it'll be really dynamic and really fun. And then, like I said, the bandits and thugs can shove bystanders or threaten them and do various other things in regards to that. So just some general notes about how to build it out. I'm not writing out a map because I don't know if I'm ever going to use it. But with these kind of criteria or with these descriptors, I can go through and draw up a quick map that meets these different requirements to make kind of a dynamic encounter on the fly, but I'm not wasting a bunch of effort going into it. So for the Azorius Senate, they're very law-abiding. They're the judge, jury, executioner types of the Ravnica setting. So they are all about like these big, stately buildings and stuff like that. So for their encounter area, I'm thinking modern art sculptures suspended by magic, kind of floating and pivoting slowly in midair, marble columns and floors, which can get very slick very easily, causing difficult terrain or letting clever players like kind of skid along the slick area to increase their movement or something like that. I'm open to players kind of figuring out how they can use these things to their advantage. And then balconies for raised attack or raised elevation for people to make ranged attacks, things like that. Another thing I had an idea for is these banners. So if you're familiar with Magic the Gathering, the Ravnica setting, the Azorius characters often are seen with like these scrolls covered in like magical runes that don't mean anything to you and me because it's the real world, but in the context of the setting, it's like a decree of some sort of legal decree or legal edict. And so I had this idea of these like magical banners around the Azorius Senate locations that are semi-solid, and they're basically just legal decrees. It's like a bulletin board saying, "Hey, now you have to abide by this rule or whatever." Um, but moving through them costs you movement speed because they're semi-solid. If you attack through them, it'll reduce your damage, or if you're doing like a range attack through them, it'll throw off your accuracy as the semi-solid barrier kind of deflects the attack a little bit. So again, clever players can use that to their advantage by kind of, making an attack and then ducking behind the banner so that anybody attacking through them has a disadvantage or forces them to move around to a more advantageous position. Basically, what I want to try to do with every encounter is I want to encourage movement. I want to reward players for moving around and taking advantage of the terrain. Because one of the things that I've never fully been able to get away from as a DM, it's probably one of my biggest failings as a dungeon master, is I will build an encounter and I can go to great lengths to avoid, this from happening, but I will start the encounter and the players find one spot in the room and they stay there the whole time. They never use any of their movement abilities. They never change position. They basically just hold tight and they bash on the monsters until the monsters die. And ideally, I would like to encourage more dynamic action in the combats. That's the goal. Whether or not that'll work, I'm not sure, but we'll put the stuff in there, and if the players make use of it, great. At the very least, it makes me feel good to have built an encounter that could be very dynamic. And then for these guys, so Azorius, I went ahead and decided that the easy encounter actually has a few more creatures in it. So we've got 3 guards, which are all challenge rating 1/8, which, if you'll remember, is the equivalent of 2 second level characters. And then we've got an acolyte and a drow, which are both CR 1/4 creatures. So they're each individual. Hold on a second. Let me make sure I got this right. So 3 guards, CR 1/8, and then 2 CR 1/4. So 2 of these are equivalent to 1 player character. So we've got 3 CR 1/8 is 1 character, 2 CR 1/4 is another character. So this encounter is the equivalent of 2 second level characters. This will be a little bit easier or a little bit tougher than the easy mode on the Krenko's gang encounter because again there are more targets, there are more sources of incoming damage and everything like that, and there's just more options that the enemies have. Like the drow will probably have the ability to like throw darkness or something like that. The acolyte might be able to heal, but the Azorius are a little bit more organized than a goblin gang, so they're going to have a little bit of an advantage there. So panic roll, that's actually a really good idea. Random effects, like lightning storms and stuff like that. are actually going to fall into the Is It encounter. So the Is It League in the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica setting, they are kind of like the mad scientists of the Ravnica world. So they're experimenting with, lightning guns and fire bombs and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So for them, having random kind of chaotic explosions of different kinds of energy and stuff like that is perfectly in keeping with their character. So that's kind of where that's going to come in. With the Azorius, like random events are a lot less likely just because they're all about order and control and, discipline and things like that. So I kind of feel like having random stuff happen in that encounter would not be in keeping with the theme of that particular group. Unless, of course, something were to show up that would throw that off. Like maybe through the course of events, an Is It League member shows up at the Azorius Senate to attack the characters, and so they're causing these random effects, and they're fighting the Azorius soldiers or whatever. So it can happen, but I don't think it's going to be an inherent part of the encounter unless something builds into that. So the medium encounter is 3 soldiers. They're all CR 1/2, so each soldier is equivalent to 1 player character. And then for a difficult encounter, we get 2 soldiers and 2 war horses. So each soldier kind of mounted on a war horse. It adds 1 extra monster into the whole thing, and mounted characters usually get some bonuses that unmounted characters wouldn't. So now, for those of you out there who might be animal lovers like me, I do my best to shy away from having animals be enemy types in my D&D adventures, because there's absolutely no reason that I should be running a story where someone gets attacked by a dog and they have to kill it. That's not something I'm a fan of. I don't think that's particularly heroic. There are some like circumstances where you could argue like, well, but it's possessed by demons or whatever. And my opinion is, if you're going to do that, just make it a full-on demon dog. Just make it evil as sin. It just happens to have taken the form of a dog. That's the way I do it. Your mileage may vary. But in this particular case, the war horses here are made up entirely of magical energy. So they're not sentient, they're not alive, they are just magical constructs that take the form of a warhorse for the purposes of the soldiers doing their soldiering. So, just a little disclaimer, and I try to stick with that kind of throughout. So, maybe they have a lair action though that forces the players to move. Yeah, now see that I can agree with. I feel like if once we get into higher levels, introducing kind of lair actions. For those of you who don't know or aren't unfamiliar with the mechanic, in 5th edition D&D, there's something called a legendary monsters, and they can be any monster. It could be a goblin, it could be a vampire, it can be a beholder, whatever. Some monsters kind of are inherently built to be function as legendary monsters, and others you can kind of elevate to legendary monster status. And one of the things they get is a lair action or multiple lair actions in the case of some legendary monsters. And basically, what that means is whenever they're in their lair, their seat of power, they can turn around and be like, super powerful, where they can control, winds. So if you're trying to like summon a toxic mist to like poison the enemy, they can just summon a gust of wind, and that happens kind of as a free action once I think it's at the top of the initiative order, at like initiative 20. So it's not something that the legendary monster even has to spend resources on. They don't have to spend actions on it. It just kind of happens. And some of them are really cool. They're like, you know, as a lair action, they can like certain Minotaur. I think if I remember correctly, Baphomet. I think he's like the demon prince that is. Is it Baphomet? I think it's Baphomet. Um, he's like the Minotaur demon prince, and he lives in this giant lair or this giant maze style lair in the abyss. And so he can turn around and he can, as a lair action, he can rearrange the labyrinth and cause the party to get split off from each other, isolate people, and things like that. So you can do some really cool stuff with lair actions. Yeah, panic rolls. So the lair actions, depending on how they're written, they will usually act at initiative 20 and initiative 10. I think that's kind of just the standard of like how they're usually written. But as the DM, you can choose to run it however you want. So you can always say it happens at the end of the initiative, or you can have it happen in the beginning. Like you said, end or beginning is kind of functionally the same, but anyways, you can kind of make your own decision on that as a DM. But lair actions are really cool. I just think it might be a bit much to throw in this early on. And maybe I'm wrong. We'll see. This first session, I don't want to overdo it too much, especially because the class that all the characters are playing is a homebrew class that we haven't tested yet. It could be very easy for me to accidentally party wipe the players on the first session, and I'd rather not do that. It doesn't make for very good entertainment. But yeah, so I followed that same format for pretty much all of the different factions. So we've got Boros. Boros are kind of like the really zealous soldiers and kind of peacekeepers in the city of Ravnica. They can be a little bit overbearing and tyrannical, kind of like the Azorius can do the same thing by passing tyrannical laws. But generally speaking, they're the ones going out there trying to, according to their recruitment posters, they're out there keeping Ravnica safe. So, believe that or not as you will. Then you've got Demir. They're kind of the shadowy, secretive spy organization. These guys don't have as much going on in the monster department, just because, generally speaking, the Demir act in kind of a cell structure, sort of like a spy ring, or if you'll excuse the analogy, kind of like a terrorist organization in some certain ways, where a lot of the times one cell doesn't know the other cell exists or what they're up to. And so you might have someone who's trying to accomplish a particular goal on behalf of their Demir like handler or whoever gives them their jobs, and they go about it by hiring in a bunch of is it wizards, or they go in and they pay off a bunch of Boros soldiers to come and act as mercenaries in their off time. And so they could run into all kinds of different things. I went ahead and did kind of generic stuff that's related to Demir. So we got shadows, who are undead creatures that are kind of semi-solid shadow, spies, a thought spy, which is a spy with spells, and a shadow kind of buddy hanging out with him. So that's kind of what's going on there. And yeah, I mean, I kind of did that again for all the different guilds. And this way, if the players decide, hey, you know what, you've dropped some plot threads for us, but we don't want to follow those. We want to go see if anybody in the cult of Rakdos happens to know this person or know about this thing. Then, if they get into a fight or if they pick a fight with the cult of Rakdos, I've got some options that I can choose from depending on how much I want them to suffer for whatever it is they did. No, I don't really mean suffer, but, how much I want them to struggle with their choice. If it comes right down to it, this might be a random roll. I don't know. We'll kind of see what the context is. So just having these encounter lists set up gives me something to pull from if they go in a direction I don't expect. And then I'll kind of describe the encounter areas for each of the different guilds between now and Sunday. So these are kind of just available and ready to go. So that's one of the things that I did. I kind of balanced out these encounter lists so that I wasn't going to kind of by default kill my players. Another thing that I did is I worked on the NPCs. NPCs are super critical. So, Nyates is our kind of main character NPC. Sorry about that. Random notification from my phone, which I'm not used to, so it kind of threw me off. So we got Nyates. She's our she, he, she, they. Let's go with they. Nyates is our changeling spy. They have the goal of accumulating enough dirt on the different guild members to coerce protection from the Simic. So basically, the Simic are the guild that is responsible for lots of like Dr. Frankenstein-esque experiments, like trying to take a crab and a lobster and smash them together. Oh, but wait, that they're already pretty similar, so that's not nearly interesting enough. So they got to take a lobster and an elephant, and they've got to smash them together for science. I don't know. Um, it's some kind of forced evolution explanation behind the Simic, so we'll get more into that later because it's going to play a part in this particular story. But the Simic created Naiads as kind of the next evolution in their spies. Naiads, however, got away because they, gave it Naiads sentience. And Naiads was like, screw this. This is terrible. I'm not doing this anymore. So Naiads bailed, and the Simic guild is trying to find them and kill them or bring them back into under control. A crabster, yes, a crab and a lobster together is a crabster. So, Naiads' allies are Krenko, because one of Naiads' kind of aliases or personas is a member of Krenko's gang, and they don't know that that's the case. I should put an asterisk here. So the asterisk next to all these things means that Naiads can call on allies in these groups only when they are in that particular identity. And so we've got a couple aliases we'll talk about at the end. Enemies, obviously, the Simic don't like Naiads. The Azorius, Selesny, and Izzet don't like Naiads because Naiads is actively blackmailing these members of these guilds. So, they're going to have problems with them. And the other guilds probably wouldn't like Naiads very much either because Naiads has been stealing secrets and other things from the different guilds. With the intention of kind of coercing the other guilds to protect them from the Simic again. So I went ahead and last session I said Naiads was going to be a 3rd level rogue. I decided to bump it up to 4 because the challenge rating kind of conversion over into player classes is a little bit wonky. And I just felt like a level 3 rogue wasn't quite substantial enough if the players do corner Naiads and decide to fight. I wanted Naiads to provide a little bit more of a challenge. Also, I wanted to build Naiads out so that the mechanics supported what Naiads was capable of doing. So 4th level rogue it was. Naiads isn't great at the fighting. Dex is 14. Actually, Wisdom and Charisma are better because Naiads is all about noticing things and talking their way out of stuff. So skills include Deception with expertise or focus on deception and investigation, but also some insight, some persuasion, some performance, some acrobatics, stuff like that. Also proficient in the Disguise Kit. And I gave Naiads a feat at 4th level, so I bumped their wisdom up by 1 to 16 and gave them the Observant feat so that they can read lips by observing a creature's mouth while the creature is speaking. So I figured that would be kind of an interesting thing for a spy to have. They can kind of sit across the room and get an idea as to what that person's talking about. Speaks a few different languages: Common, Goblin, Elven, Minotaur. I chose some common languages among Ravnica, especially among the guilds that Naiads has had interactions with. Sneak Attack, 2nd story work, which is a level 3 thief archetype, or rogue archetype called the Thief. Hey, Adventures of Tony, thanks for catching the stream. I appreciate it. Always nice to have someone tuning in for the first time. We're just planning out our next, our kind of adventure for our Ravnica D&D live stream, the first session of which will be this Sunday. The first official gameplay session, anyways. I'm doing well, thank you. I love doing D&D stuff. I love DMing, so I'm, a kid in a candy store right now. Kashra, yeah, Naiads does need to be tough enough to kind of hang if the players decide to fight. Not so much that I want Naiads to definitely win by default, but I want the players to kind of have to think, like, maybe kind of regret it if they get into a fight with Naiads and be like, was that worth it? I don't know. So, anyways, as a third level rogue, Naiads chose the thief archetype and got the second story workability, which means that there's no movement cost for climbing. So usually when you're climbing in D&D, every 5 feet up costs like 15 feet of your movement speed or something like that. That's not the case for Naiads. Naiads can scurry up walls, no problem. And then also, Naiads gets additional distance on a running jump equal to her dexterity modifier. It's only 2 feet, but it might make the difference between her catching onto a ledge or not. So we've got her actions, her different weapon attacks. She's got a rapier and a short sword, so she fights two-handed. She's got some daggers. She's got a short bow. And then as an action, she can change appearance. So that actually means that she can completely alter her appearance physically, and she has a really, really good chance of avoiding someone finding out about her disguise. Sorry, I say their disguise. So that's kind of one of the changeling race's specialties. Also, as a bonus action, because she's a rogue, or because they're a rogue, I keep doing that. Naiads gets cunning action, and because they're a thief, they get the fast hands ability as well, which means they can do a bunch of things as a bonus action, including dashing, which is moving a second time, disengaging, so you can avoid opportunity attacks, hiding, doing sleight of hand, using thieves' tools, or using the use an object action. So drink a potion and run and attack, or various combinations of those things. And then as a reaction, Naiads can do Unsettling Visage, where they can impose disadvantage on the attack roll coming in, but they can only do that once per rest. So it's kind of a, boogity boogity boo, throws the enemy off their game and causes them to miss the attack. So it's kind of a Hail Mary, I don't have many hit points left, I would rather you didn't hit me with that sword type of thing. Awesome. That would be great. Having your friends tune in would be fantastic. And having them chat with us would be just as great, because D&D is fun, but if we didn't want to chat with people who are watching, we would just not play on a live stream. So yeah, more interaction is better. But having said that, let's talk about Naiads' aliases. So I kind of hemmed and hawed over this for a little bit because I wanted to come up with aliases that would make sense. And I think we discussed in a previous live stream that Naiads kind of burned some of their alias bridges with the other guilds. So they're only kind of left with these aliases at the moment. So there's Corporal Aranth, who is a human male, serves as a corporal in the Boros Legion. He's young, heavily scarred, serves as a scout, kind of keeps to himself. So it's kind of a good cover story for a spy. Then we've got a Demir alias. It's Rulicia. Rulicia? Yeah, Rulicia. No, Rulicia. I'm gonna have to mess with the pronunciation on that one. Rulicia. Female half elf, middle aged, graying hair, very ordinary looking, and just works as a courier. Just carries messages back and forth. Totally legit. Doesn't do anything underhanded, at least in that particular guise. The Rulicia alias is there mostly to get information from Demir by acting as like a drop point for Demir agents, as well as just getting information and stuff like that by passing letters back and forth. So there's also the Rakdos alias is Gantis. It's an agender tiefling, so neither male nor female, doesn't identify either way. Teenager with cloven hooves, a thin tail, lots of facial piercings and tattoos, and does a lot of emo poetry about using identity as a tool, or how identity can be crippling or how it can be freeing and stuff like that. So a little bit meta there, but it's kind of a clue that might help the players identify this person if they're paying attention to what's going on. It may not ever come up, but who knows. Then we've got Ungren, a male half-orc who is a member of Krenko's gang. And this half-orc is scrawny, sickly, possibly even crippled. Serves as a lookout for the gang when Ungren is around. So this is kind of like, this is Nyatz's go-to, I need to hide out somewhere away from the guilds. And so Nyatz goes into this form and goes and hangs out with Krenko because most guilds don't want to have anything to do with the gangs. Like Boros, maybe, but they've got no reason to come looking for Ungren specifically. So, panic roll. It's a good question. As far it's Niets, Niets, so Niets, and it's not necessarily that Niets needs to be they or them. It's more a matter of the changeling race. So changelings are born without a specific gender. They can literally become any gender they want. So if they prefer to identify one way or another, then they can just kind of make their default persona female or male. In Nyatz's case, because of the condition under which they were created, it's not important to them, so they just kind of go with they them. So it's less a matter of necessity and more just a matter of it not mattering type of thing. So yeah, and it may be one of those things that the players stumble over a little bit, saying they or them rather than he, she, but we'll get over it eventually. We'll get used to it. Kind of the way I've forced myself to, because I've stumbled on it a few times myself. Yeah, exactly. It's great practice because there are lots of people like this out in the real world. So, also, I should mention the fact that a villain character, quote unquote, and she's not, Nyatz really isn't a villain. Nyatz is an NPC of interest, could become an antagonist, could become a protagonist, or an ally. I'm not trying to send the message that people who are transgender or non-binary or who identify, as whatever gender they identify as, are inherently bad guys. So don't think I'm trying to send that message. Just FYI. So next we got Liuda. We actually talked about her last session, so we're going to skip her. And we're going to go right into talking about our blackmail victims. This was something we came up with a little bit last session, but I hadn't really identified who they were yet. So first I'm going to introduce Milosh. Milosh is a male centaur from the Selesnya Conclave, and he accidentally got a bunch of his compatriots killed by trying to broker a little alliance with a Gruul warband, who basically went, yeah, sure, yeah, no, we're totally cool people, and then killed all of his friends. So, he's not particularly proud of that, and Nyatz basically showed up and was like, kind of covered up the details, so that Milosh wouldn't get in trouble, but now he's being blackmailed with it. So, Azin, I cannot possibly think to pronounce your name correctly, so I will just say hello and thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. We're currently working on planning out the first official gameplay session for our Ravnica D&D game. So welcome. Awesome, panic roll. I'm glad you didn't actually identify Nyatz as the bad guy inherently, because that's really not the case. Again, depending on how the players handle it, they can very easily piss Nyatz off, and then Nyatz becomes a thorn in their side. But we'll see how it goes. And Casher, that's a good point too. Like when they come across Nyatz, it'll be in one alias or another, and that's kind of the whole point of having different aliases and different genders is because it throws people off and causes some confusion. And in the confusion, Nyatz can kind of slip away or kind of redirect the topic of conversation. So it's likely the PCs will say she or he until they figure out those different people are actually the same person. Yep, definitely. And I'm really hoping that we get a few sessions in before the players realize that some of these characters are the person they're looking for, just in disguise, so that we can have that great moment where one of the players goes, "Oh shit!" Because I love getting that reaction as a dungeon master. Excuse my language, but so having said that, the next one we've got is Otravak, a male Vidalcan, and Vidalcan is a race specific to Ravnica. And I don't know much about these guys actually. I need to read up on them a lot before the session because I want to make sure that I kind of have the characterization correct before I have to roleplay them. But Otravak and Vidalcan in general have a tendency to they're of the opinion that we're all mortal. I was going to say we're all human, but technically in this game we're not. We're all mortal. So we're all mortal, we're all imperfect, we're going to make mistakes. Making mistakes is a good thing because then you improve. You learn from those mistakes, you get better, and by you getting better, society gets better. And so it's kind of like the evolution of society by embracing imperfections. So Otravak is an Azorius juror, so he actually presides over a lot of legal cases and stuff like that, and helps to make decisions in favor of or against the defendant. And he took a bribe. Someone got killed. The killer was Nyates, who was trying to get an in with the Azorius so that Nyates could bribe this particular person. So that's our Azorius blackmail victim. Yes, I know. I'll put a quarter in the swear jar. Panic roll. I apologize. And then our Izzet blackmail victim is going to be Lizaxa. She's a female goblin. So Lizaxa. Lizaxa? Lizaxa? I think it's Lizaxa. It's slightly more awkward to pronounce, which I think is perfect for goblins. So it's Lizaxa. And Lizaxa is actually a Dimir agent who has infiltrated the Izzet League as an experimental wizardess, basically. But she is taking some of those secrets or some of those experiments and sending the information back to the Dimir, but she's also selling some of it to Krenko. So she's kind of providing Krenko's gang with these experimental weapons and unstable substances and stuff like that. So, you know, Lizaxa has definitely gotten herself into some trouble, and Nyates has been quick. Once Nyates found out about this, was quick to jump in and start blackmailing Lizaxa for information. So that kind of ties the main story back around to Krenko. So it's yet another kind of plot thread that if the players lose track of where they're going, they can always run into some members of Krenko's gang who are looking for Lizaxa, and we can jumpstart the plot again that way. So there are a few different plot threads by which the players can continue investigating this little story, so that we don't run into any dead ends or brick walls that would prevent moving forward. So those are the two big things that I did between sessions. I built out the encounter lists, I expanded on the NPCs. I don't have stats for Liuda and Mylosh and Otravak and Lizaxa. And yes, I said all their names again on purpose because I have to practice them so that I don't stumble over them during the episode on Sunday. But I didn't stat them out because I don't expect them to get into a fight. If they do, I can just pull up a stat block that I think kind of matches, and I can run with that. So it's effort that doesn't necessarily need to be sunk into the preparation. So I skipped it. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at for this. Let me see here. Let me check the plot document. So we've got... Okay, so the plot document is not super organized, just FYI. So if I'm scrolling through it and it jumps from one thought to another, apologies. It's more kind of stream of consciousness, just tossing ideas here and there, eventually going back and putting those ideas in where they kind of fit in. but it's not meant to be an organized, tabulated reference document. It's mostly there for me to put ideas down and kind of refer back to it at a later time. And I might go through and reorganize it later, but for right now, it's going to be a mess. Having said that, one of the things that we did with the players between sessions is we actually came up with contacts. So NPCs that these players have connections with that they can go in and get information, they can get leads, whatever the case may be. So to that end, Andrew, whose character is the kind of werewolf character from Innistrad, his character knows somebody in the Golgari who are all about like decay and rot and stuff like that, but also kind of rebirth through the natural cycle. So his character knows somebody in the Golgari who can find pretty much anything for the right price. Um, Usually that's objects, like so if he needs a piece of gear, he can get it, but it might also extend to information to a greater or lesser extent. Sophia, who is playing a merfolk, who is a Selesnya merfolk, well, she's leaning Selesnya, but she actually comes from Ixalan, which is kind of it's kind of got a South American, like Aztec-y vibe to it. It's actually a really cool setting. I like it a lot. She actually has caught the interest of one of the head dryads in the Selesnya Conclave. So there is someone in the Selesnya Conclave who is like, something you did got my attention, and I'm keeping an eye on you, which could be good or bad. And then finally, Samson, who is playing the Naga from Amonkhet, which is kind of like the ancient Egypt equivalent setting for Magic the Gathering. He actually has a friend in the Boros Legion who was recently promoted to a prestigious unit called the Sunhome Guard. So his friend is a little bit more influential, kind of on via official channels, but also now is a lot busier than normal, so harder to get to. So a few different avenues that the players can take to get information that will lead to different pieces of like plot coming to them or different clues. For instance, the guy in the Sunhome Guard, or I don't, it could be a guy, could be a girl, I don't know yet. But the Boros character in the Sunhome Guard that is tied to Samson's character might know that there's an Azorius juror who's having some problems, or might be able to. I think somewhere in the plot document we've got a section where there was an Orzhov safe house that is currently been cordoned off by the Boros Legion. So they might be able to go talk to Samson's friend in the Sunhome Guard to get authorization to go into the site, whereas they wouldn't normally be able to do that. On the other hand, having a head dryad paying attention to Sophia's character could get them into more trouble, especially if they go to deal with Mylosh and the head dryad starts to be like, why are they hanging around here talking to this guy? What's going on? So a few different options for ways that I can either push the plot along or the players can kind of tie who they know into the plot itself. So that's one of the things, honestly, when it gets right down to it, as a DM, I think that's what requires the most preparation. It's not encounters. Yeah, that takes some time, especially if you want to do interesting encounters, so it's not just the same hack and slash every time. But the encounters aren't the bulk of prepping for an adventure. The bulk of the work goes into figuring out how you can keep the players on track in some capacity. And not on track in a railroading perspective, like, oh, I'm going to force them to follow this storyline. If the players don't want to follow that storyline, they're going to derail that train, they're going to crash into a mountain, they're going to kill everybody, and then they're going to go off and they're going to go pet unicorns. Like, whatever the players want to do, they're going to go do. But a lot of that stems from the players getting lost in the story and not knowing how to proceed, and the DM not giving them the right kind of approaches or avenues by which to continue. So that's one of the things I spend a lot of time is, okay, how can I connect this plot point to this plot point in a logical way that doesn't break the game, doesn't create plot holes, but allows them to, continue on the same general adventure. Again, if they don't want to do that, then that's out of my hand. But at the very least, I try to prep for it. Yeah. I have to come up with those NPCs. I just realized. Like, I know the general idea behind who they are, but I didn't actually come up with names or anything like that. So that's what I'm going to be doing between now and Sunday. But that should be fairly easy. It's mostly just coming up with a name and a couple of minor personality traits. And then through their interactions, the players can get to know those characters a little bit better. And so can I, because I won't have anything beyond those short descriptions. So, does anybody have any questions? You feel a special one-off campaign coming on? You want to go off and pet unicorns after crashing a train into a mountain, don't you? You're one of those players. To be fair, I want to go pet unicorns too, so I'll allow it this time. But yeah, that's it for this session. I think I'm happy to stick around, answer any questions, field any suggestions or anything like that. Like I said earlier, more interaction is better. I love chatting about stuff like this, and sure, I can just talk at the screen for an hour, but it's, again, I could, if I wanted to do that, I could just plan the campaign on my own and scream at stupid YouTube videos. So yeah. Yes, names. Names is one of the toughest things. Luckily, the Dungeons and Dragons books, wherever you're getting the racial like stats and everything from, usually will come up with name suggestions for those characters, but having a huge list of them is also helpful. So glad I was able to catch the stream. I will. Thank you very much, Tony. I appreciate you tuning in. And hopefully you'll check us out again next week or on Sunday, or you'll tell your friends about us. We also do a comic book writing and drawing live stream every Monday. It's me and Samson writing out a comic. So, tell your friends about that and check that out too. Panicle, you think you know someone who may have derailed the train? Oh, wait. I think you're talking about me. Am I right? Was it me shanking like the boss of an area without really, talking through it or anything like that? I think that might be me. Oh, well, thank you, Tony. I appreciate that. You're awesome yourself. We're a big fan of your cosplay from Comic-Con last year, so we'll definitely keep an eye out for additional opportunities to work together in the future. If I have to ask it's me, fine. I'm willing to accept that because my character did not like the guy and decided he needed to be dead. So I made it happen. But yeah, if there aren't any other questions or suggestions or anything like that, then we will probably be signing off in the next couple of minutes. And I will be doing some last minute prep. Nothing major because any major stuff I would have done on stream tonight, but just a few last minute tweaks, final details before we jump into the first session. Yeah. Thanks again for tuning in, everybody. You can find us on Instagram at ravensdale.publishing. Please follow us here on Twitter. I always say that. Twitch and Twitter are too similar. Please follow us here on Twitch. You can find us on Twitter as well. This video will be going up on YouTube, so if you missed the entire first part of it and you want to kind of find out how it started off, it'll be up on our YouTube channel, which is just Ravensdale Publishing, so it's easy to search. And it's under our Ravensdale Roleplays Ravnica playlist. So, Tony, it'd be great to play games with you. We'll definitely have to schedule something here in the near future. In the meantime, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Have a great night, everybody.